former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and President Trump's longest-serving national security advisor, John Bolton. Mr. Ambassador, thanks so much for being here with us. I just first want to ask you about the breaking news that we've been reporting on. President Biden approving Ukraine's use of these long-range U.S. weapons inside of Russia. What do you think about that move?
Well, it's the right decision. I'm just worried it's too little, too late. This should have happened 2 years ago, and it's emblematic of the sad reality that although the United States wasn't able to deter the Russian invasion, for this 2.5 years, Russia has largely deterred the United States and NATO from providing adequate assistance to Ukraine on a strategic basis. It's been one long public debate after another, going back to, shall we supply ATACMS to the Ukrainians at all? First it's no, then there's a debate, then there's yes. Should we supply the Ukrainians Abrams tanks? First it's no, then there's a long debate, then it's yes. Should we supply the Ukrainians with F-16s? First it's no, then there's a long debate, and it's yes. Now, can we allow the Ukrainians to use ATACMS inside Russia? After a long debate, now it's yes. But it's 2 months until Donald Trump is inaugurated, and I think there's little doubt what's going to happen here. Aid to Ukraine is most likely to diminish significantly, and it's, I think, the failure of the past 2.5 years to supply weapon systems on a strategic basis. It's a major contributing factor to the military gridlock we see now.
Yeah, the timing of all of this is pretty specific. And as our Kevin Liptak was reporting it, really, he says, in the eyes of U.S. officials, comes at what they're thinking of as an inflection point.
Well, the inflection point was the American election. There could have been an inflection point 2 years ago if the Biden administration, after completely bumbling the initial Russian attack, remember, the intelligence assessment or the political conclusion about the intelligence was, and briefed to Congress days after the Russian attack, that Kyiv would fall in a matter of days and the whole country would fall in a matter of weeks. That was one argument that persuaded the Biden administration not to put more weapons assistance into Ukraine even before the Russian invasion in February of 2022.
And I want to ask your opinion. Russian President Vladimir Putin has previously warned that allowing Ukraine to use these long-range weapons inside Russia would mean the NATO allies are directly at war with Russia, and that, quote, appropriate decisions would be made to those threats. We just heard Fred Pleitgens reporting there about how they've changed the wording around their nuclear rules. Are you concerned about that piece of it?
No, there are two aspects to this. Number one, this threat of a wider war, that's the phrase we've heard day after day after day in the last 2.5 years from the Biden administration, could be conventional, could be nuclear. If it's a conventional threat, where's the Russian army that's going to provoke this wider war? And by the way, if it's so good and so extensive, why isn't it fighting in Ukraine in the first place, given the miserable performance of Russian combat arms so far? And as to the nuclear threat, look, that change in Russian doctrine was insignificant. We have never renounced the first use of nuclear weapons if we need to, and basically that's all they're saying. We have testimony from the heads of U.S. intelligence agencies in public sessions that despite multiple rattlings of the nuclear saber by Putin and others, there's never been a redeployment of Russian nuclear forces. I'm not saying you don't take it seriously, but if Putin can outbluff us, he gets what he wants for free.
I want to move on and talk a little bit more broadly about the incoming Trump administration. And you note that that's happening very soon, and then that will change not only the positioning likely in Ukraine, but more broadly a lot of foreign policy. I want to talk first about who the president-elect has selected for his director of national intelligence, former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. You have described her as a national security threat. What do you think, just having now had that information kind of set in and seeing that he is confident in pushing her forward, what do you think generally about that pick, if we can just get a little more thought on that? And then also, too, what might that mean for the war in Ukraine, where she has been known to spout some Russian propaganda?
Well, I think in the transition period, there's always a lot of blue smoke and mirrors from the incoming administration. This is a very serious mistake. if Tulsi Gabbard is allowed to take over as Director of National Intelligence. To begin with, she has zero experience dealing with the intelligence community, and that position was set up by Congress, mistakenly in my view, but they set it up to coordinate all intelligence agencies within the government. She doesn't have the slightest idea what the job involves. As a member of Congress, she got intelligence briefings that she often said she didn't believe. I don't think she has any basis on which to manage this huge and critically important function of the federal government. And number two, she has over the years spouted delusional beliefs about events in Syria, about events in Iran, about Russian policy, that her own fellow members of Congress have set amount to repeating Russian propaganda. She's not capable of doing it. Her judgment is non-existent, and the idea that somehow she would be put in charge of this critical function should be giving our adversaries in Moscow and Beijing a lot of relief.
Do you expect the Senate Republicans to push back on this?
Well, I certainly hope they should. The Gabbard and Gates are the two worst appointments. There are others that are in controversy, but those are the two worst. Just because Donald Trump won a fairly narrow majority, maybe less than 2 percentage points, and an electoral college victory, all of 6 electoral college votes bigger than his 2016 win, is no excuse for the Senate to abandon its constitutional function. And I think there will be enough Republicans, maybe not a majority, but enough to block these nominations, and if they're not, we're in deep trouble.
Yeah, and you bring up Matt Gaetz. I did want to ask you about that. You've called him the worst nomination in American history. Elon Musk responded to you on X, calling you a, quote, dumb warmonger, saying your opposition to this pick is a good sign. I want to let you respond to that. I also want to get your thoughts on the role that Elon Musk is playing in this incoming administration.
Well, I don't particularly care about Elon Musk's opinion. He has no notion what the qualifications for Attorney General are, and I think somebody with Matt Gaetz's characters is a person that I'm surprised anybody wants to associate with. Look, Musk may have a big role here. It's not entirely clear what Trump is going to do with this Department of Government Efficiency. If we can save a couple $100 billion, I'd be delighted. We can spend it on the defense budget, which desperately needs an increase. In the meantime, I do believe that a sufficient number of Republican senators would say they will not abandon the separation of powers. They will see Gaetz as the threat that he is to the kind of professional Justice Department we want. If the complaint from Trump is the Department of Justice has been politicized by the Biden administration, then the remedy is depoliticize it. Matt Gaetz is exactly the opposite of that. He will make it worse, and I think could cause problems in the department it could take decades to repair.
And I know you've called for the FBI to investigate both Gabbard and Gaetz before any Senate confirmation hearings. We know that the Trump administration is looking to not do these FBI background investigations and checks before putting them up formally for their nominations. How do you think, again, just getting back at this, just what Senate Republicans might say about this? And do you think it's worth them really pushing back on this if they're not getting all of the information they need to properly vet these individuals?
Yeah, look, these FBI background investigations are absolutely customary for all cabinet nominees and most of the senior appointments below the cabinet level. They're not singling out Gaetz or Gabbard to put them through this process. And particularly when you're talking about the top law enforcement official of the federal government, who has an enormous national security role, overseeing the FBI, overseeing counterintelligence, overseeing prosecutions by the National Security Division, as well as the law enforcement functions. We can't have somebody with the kinds of flaws it looks like Matt Gaetz has. And similarly with Tulsi Gabbard, the ultimate keeper of our secrets is somebody, if she can't get through an FBI full field investigation, who in his right mind can vote for her for that job?
And we really have to go, but I do just want to ask you quickly. So many Americans say we don't trust the government. They want Trump to kind of rhetorically, burn it down, essentially. They don't want norms anymore. What do you say to them when it comes to this sort of thing? We don't want the norms. It's fine. Let them blow past what's normal here.
Well, you know, it's the proper functioning of the Justice Department serves everybody, and people have to say, if we burn it down here, this is like the quote from Thomas More in A Man for All Seasons, once you've flattened all the laws, who will protect you against the winds that will blow across this country?